But James chapter 3, again, just so we can kind of, if you would bear with me, we did not read the text last week. I want to read it because I do plan on finishing up everything here tonight. We have plenty of time to do that again. James is writing, and he says, "My brethren, be not many masters," or teachers is the word that could be put there. That's not bosses or lords, it's teachers, masters. "Knowing that we shall receive the greater damnation. For in many things we offend all." Shh. "If any man offend, not in word, the same is a perfect, a complete man, able also to bridle the whole body. Behold, we put bits in the horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn about their whole body. Behold also the ships, which though they be so great and are driven of fierce winds, yet are they turned about with a very small helm, whithersoever their governor listeth or desires. Even so the tongue is a little member, and boasteth great things. Behold, how great a matter a little fire kindleth. And so the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. So is the tongue among our members, that it defileth the whole body, and setteth on fire the course of nature, and is set on fire of hell. For every kind of beast and birds and of serpents and things in the sea is tamed and hath been tamed of mankind. But the tongue can no man tame. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. Therewith bless we God, even the Father, and therewith curse we men which are made after the similitude or the likeness of God. Out of the same mouth proceedeth blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not so to be." He says you ought not to be singing, "Oh, how I love Jesus," with one verse, with one breath, and using profanity and cursing the next breath. And it's amazing to me today how many believers think it's okay to cuss and to be profane with their words. And then he says in verse 11, "Doth a fountain send forth at the same place sweet water and bitter? Can the fig tree, my brethren, bear olive berries, either vine figs?" And the answer to those questions are what? No. "So can no fountain both yield salt water and fresh?" When you mix salt water and fresh, what do you get it? What's it called down? Brackish water, exactly. It's not any good either. It's not fit for anything. And he said in verse 13, "Who is a wise man and endued with knowledge among you? Let him show out of a good conversation his works with meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter envying and strife in your hearts, glory not and lie not against the truth. This wisdom descendeth not from above, but is earthly, sensual, devilish. For where envying and strife is, there is confusion and every evil work. But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, and easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. And the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace of them that make peace." All right, may God add his blessings to the reading of his word this evening. Reading the word of God is always a profitable exercise, I believe. We've looked at the responsibility of the tongue in verses 1 and 2. We saw the influence of the tongue last time together in verses 3 and 4, actually the last two times together. I want you to pick up with me tonight Oh, I know where I stopped. We stopped just at verse 5 last week. I misplaced my note there. But let's pick up. We're going to talk about the influence of the tongue. We talked about it. A little bridle controls a great horse. A little rudder commands a great ship. A little spark starts a great fire. Let me read to you what John Gill said in his commentary. He said, "It is like to fire. It is very useful in its place. Fire is very useful in its place, to warm and to comfort. So is the tongue in Christian conversation and in the ministry of the word. The hearts of God's children when the tongue is properly used, will burn within them. Isn't that what happened to the disciples on the road to Emmaus? Did not our heart burn within us? They said. And Gill continues, he said, the hearts of the children will burn within them while they are talking together and while the scriptures of truth are opening to them. But as fire should be carefully watched and kept, so should men take heed to their ways and their words, that they sin not with their tongue, and keep their tongue from evil, and their lips from speaking guile. For as fire kindles and rises up into a flame, so angry and uncontrolled and passionate words will soon stir up the flame of lust and anger and envy and revenge. And as a fire of a spreading nature, so are lies, scandals, evil reports vented by the tongue. And as fire devours all that comes its way, such are the words of an evil tongue, and therefore called devouring words in Psalm 52:4. They devour the good names of men. We see that have been carried out in our news this week, haven't we? I've seen it many times in churches. I've seen it many times. I like the way he says that. He says the words of an evil tongue devour the names of good names of men. And they corrupt good manners and destroy those who make use of them. What wood is to fire, and what coals are to burning fire, so are the whisperers, the tale-bearers, the backbiters, the contentious person to inflaming strife with their words. That's pretty powerful. John Gill wrote back, I think it was in the 18th or 17th century, I forget. But that is still so true today. And we learned one of the principles in Proverbs that words have the power to heal or to kill. And I've been a while, but some of you may remember the illustration I've used with Karen Carpenter, one of the popular pop singers way back in the 60s and 70s. Her and her brother were being interviewed by a radio disc jockey, and she put on a little weight. But he introduced them on the air as Richard Carpenter and his chubby little sister, Karen. Those words sunk down to her. She died of what? Anybody remember what she died of? Anorexia. Because of the loose, careless words of a radio disc jockey one day. And then she starved herself to death. And that was such a sad thing, because the girl had an incredibly beautiful voice. And of course, especially everybody still loves to hear her sing those Christmas carols that were recorded so many times years ago. And and just words have power. Words have meaning. And that's the reason why I think as believers, we ought to become very learned in how to use words properly. In a day and age when it seems word usage and proper grammar and proper speech is just taking a nosedive because everything's going to sound bites and text coding on these things, And it's taking away the ability to properly. That's the reason why. You listen to some of the great orators of history, and you think of Winston Churchill back in World War II. It wasn't because he was such a great strategist, but he had the ability to use words to motivate a nation. What was his most famous speech? You can say it. It's 5 words. He made it a collegiate graduation. Never, 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 never quit. That was his speech. And yet that has motivated so many people. What's that power? They could either build up or they could tear it down. Huh?
And so it took me to when you saw what England looked like after the bombing.
Right.
They would have, most nations would have quit.
Yeah, but he motivated a nation.
France gave up.
Regardless of what you felt about him, he was one of the great orators of our lifetime. That was Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan knew how to use words. I can still watch his speeches today on YouTube, but I still get emotional. I shed a tear. because he had a way of capturing you with his words, and he had a way of critiquing his enemy without criticizing his enemy. It's a way in ways that he knew that they knew that they were being criticized, but it wasn't bad. He had an eloquent way of dealing with it. Like the time when he said, it's not that the Democrats are wrong. He said there's just so much that they believe to be true that it simply isn't true. No, that was a 1964 speech that he made. And so what I'm saying is, James tells us that words carry force, they carry power, they carry the ability to heal, they carry the ability to destroy. You ever had I've heard of kids yelling and screaming at moms or dads, I hate you. That's powerful words that they can never recover. Now they can apologize, say, I didn't mean it. I was a parent because I know you didn't, but those words still have deep cuts. How many of us here have had people say things to us? You know, so I learned early on, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I figured that out to be a lie years ago. Amen. I can heal. You hit me with a rock, I can heal up. But those words, Proverbs says, goes down into the innermost parts of the belly. Back years ago, growing up, I heard preachers. There's a popular illustration at the time. Some of you older folks may remember it. But a guy who had trouble controlling his anger and his words, he'd vent off at everybody. His preacher went over one day, and he had a pillow on his arm, one of them big old feather pillows. And it was a windy day outside. You've heard it. And he said, what you doing with the pillow? He said, I want you to take that pillow, go to the top of that hill right there, slice it open with this knife, and throw the feathers into the wind. Preacher, what's this all about? Just go do it. Would you do it for me because you trust me? Yes, sir. He went up and did it. Came back a few minutes. He had the empty pillow sack. He said, now what do you want to do? He said, go back and gather up all those feathers. Put them back in the pillow. He said, you know I can't do that. Those feathers, no telling where they are. They're probably 2 states away, some of them now. And he said, I want you to realize that once you let words out of your mouth, they're like those feathers. You can never crown them back in. You can never undo the harm they've done. It's changed the man's life. And I don't know whether it's true or just an illustration, but it's a good illustration either way with a great truth. And that's what James says here. But I want you to notice the recklessness of the tongue. That's the third major point here in verses 7 and 8. In these verses, we see the tongue is reckless. Why? Because it's untamable. He said, man, we controlled every kind of animals. And I remember when Gary Silva and I were over in Thailand. And we were in Thailand, and we were working with a missionary there. We had some leisure time. So obviously we were over there almost 2 weeks. And we went to a snake show. These guys had trained cobras. And they were, and I would say trained them. These cobras did their, you know, whatever the handler told, you know, beckoned with them. But they had trained these deadly snakes. They had a variety of snakes there, and they had a variety of things going on. And they had one snake. They had it in a basket. And Gary and I and all of us, we were sitting on the bleachers over here. And they warned us, saying, now this one is the Thai jumping snake. And they said it can jump 10 times its length. And it's deadly. So be careful, just no moving when we open the basket and the handler brings it out. He reached down and took the lid off the basket. And he brings the snake out and he goes, whoa! And it went up and landed right on Gary's lap. It was a feint. Gary, if you knew Gary, hated snakes with a passion.
Couldn't have picked a better target.
He didn't know Gary. It wasn't that he was singling Gary out. Gary just happened to be the better. I mean, Gary, like I thought Gary was going to have to go back home. Because, I mean, that Puerto Rican man hustled and moved, buddy.
Indiana Jones.
Snakes. I hate snakes, yes. But James said, we have, and they did. And we saw we saw elephant handlers. They trained these massive, where does an elephant sleep? Anywhere it wants to, but yet you have this handler commanding this multi-thousand pound beast doing its will. James said we've been able to train and tame all kinds of animals. But this one thing right here we cannot tame. All right, I'll lift my hand first. How many within the past 6 months have said something to you which you haven't seen? Now we'll just leave it at 6 months. We won't get it up closer, okay? We've all done that. Why? Because it's untamable. You cannot tame it. But notice what he said. It's not only untamable, it's unruly. Look in verse 8. He said, it's it's unruly evil, full of deadly poison. You think a snake's fangs have poison in them? I remember back when I pastored in South Alabama, I had a Vietnam veteran Marine guy in my church named Kenneth. Good, fine young man. Well, he wasn't a young man, he was older than me. But he had all kind of difficulties left over from Vietnam, Agent Orange and all that goes with that. But his position in Nam, he had been what they call a tunnel rat. And I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but what's that? No, it's not. But his job was to go down to the tunnels, and he said that the thing he feared most was not the North Vietnamese, huh? But what?
All they had was 45. Some of them might have had a grease gun or something, but they couldn't very much do with
Tunnels were so small, but the thing he feared most was called the two-step, a snake that was deadly poison. And he said, I said, two-step? He said, yes, because if it bites you, you take about 2 steps and you're done. And he went home to be with the Lord way too young because of all the damage done to his body and Nam, the Agent Orange and all that went with that. But you think that's deadly? How many lives have tongues ruined? Again, you just look to our present news. You look to our present news, and that's the reason I read about. Somebody was commenting, I forget where it was, I saw it, I read it this morning in my morning reading. But a mother had her daughter and grown daughter and her 2 grandsons over at the house, and they were in the swimming pool. A couple of young girls from the next door wanted to come over and go swimming with them. She told them no. And the daughter said, Mom, why? It'd be okay if they come up. She said, oh, it's not in this day and age. She said, those 2 young girls are under 12 years old. You got teenage boys, 14 and 16 out there. All it's going to take is an accusation, and their lives are ruined. Lies, mama. And that's the age we live in today. A tongue. And now, folks, I'm against any sexual predator or sexual abuse of any way, shape, form, or fashion. But we're living in a day now where as long as it's a female making accusation, then it's done. And, if this judge survives this inquisition, that's what it is from the left, I'll be surprised. I hope he does. But again, the damage is done. The damage is done. You look at Clarence Thomas even. Here it is, how many years later removed from him, 1991 to now. And still, that's a baggage he's dealing with, even though his accusation in 1991 was proven to be false. But, again, the tongue is a poisonous thing. And, folks, that's the reason why, as Christians, we have to be so careful. And I guess 2 or 3 years ago, I guess closer to 2 years ago, I really made it a point. If you follow me on Facebook, you know I really changed a lot of how I deal with people. I try not to be harsh, mean-spirited, even with those that I disagree with. Even if I think they're idiots and heretics, I don't tell them that. Because what good does that do? What does it accomplish? If I don't have your attention, and if you're not listening to me because I've turned you off with my words. See, again, one of the great pitfalls, I think, of the independent Baptist movement was that independent Baptists became so mean-spirited, critical of anybody that didn't do things just the same way. And you can't build relationships you can't build relationships that way. And Jesus didn't do that. Jesus, he confronted sin, but he did it in a loving way. The woman at the well, go get your husband. Well, I don't have a husband. Boy, you're telling the truth there. You've had 5, and the one you're living with now is not your husband. The woman taken in adultery in John 8. Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more. He said sin. But his harsh words were for the religious hypocrites. The ones that looked at him and said, and asked the disciples, why is your master eating with sinners? That's what he came to rescue. Amen? And it's just, we've got to learn, and I learned that, I'm afraid I learned that too late in my life in ministry. I wish I'd learned that sooner. Because I was about as, in my early ministry, I was about as tactful as a 2x4 up against your head, okay? Anybody with me on that one? I wish I hadn't been that way. But it's full of deadly poison. And poison don't always taste like poison. Jim Jones fed all those folks Kool-Aid many years ago. But it killed them all with poison. And sometimes our poisonous words can sound good, but they're deadly. So we've got to be careful. Did I say enough about that? Anybody got any comments you want to add to that tonight? Amen. Well, let's look at number 4 at the inconsistency of the tongue in verses 9 through 12. The inconsistency of the tongue. What do I mean? Well, to paraphrase, we've already read it. Notice the contradiction in verse 9 and 10. He said, out of one mouth, you've got salt water and fresh water. You've got sweet and sour coming out. It just shouldn't be that way. He said, you're cursing man in one breath and praising God with the next breath. You know, a preacher, I saw his post on Facebook. He's one that's going off the deep end all of a sudden. He said, I don't give a blank about theology or doctrine. All I want to practice is love, like God. Out of the same mouth, cursing and blessing.
I see that a lot on Facebook, brother. People use vulgar language and they claim to be Christian.
Yes, sir.
I don't mean just the normal, come out like the F-bomb. They're not talking that word. I don't know what it is.
There's a whole section, Wade, and for those that are watching on YouTube, he talked about how many people on Facebook claim to be Christians and are using profane language, the harsh language as well. But there's a whole section of so-called Christianity today that will attack you for telling them that it's wrong to use those words. God's not interested in that. That's old-style legalism. There was a preacher that fell from grace, as it were, a couple of years back named Martin Driscoll out on the West Coast. Some of y'all may have heard of him. He was well known all over the place, multi-thousands at his church. But he was one that had no problem using profanity and said it didn't bother God. But through a series of events, I don't know all that took place, he resigned from his church, had to resign from his church, and the church wound up shutting down. Mars Hill Church. Wound up shutting down. That tells you what it was built on. It wasn't built on Christ. But because when you can go from thousands to shutting down real quickly because the man leaves. And I don't say that to be harsh. I pray that he's repented of his errors and got right with God. Whether he's saved or not, that's not for me to judge. But all I can say is fruit didn't bear it out apparently. But there's that contradiction with the inconsistency. He said these things ought not so to be. Look at the clarification of it. He says in verse 11 and 12, he said, just like no fig tree can bear berry olives, no vine can bear figs, no fountain can give you salt water and fresh water at the same time. He said, neither should this mount be used as a garbage dump. That's the reason we have to be careful. You know, I'll see kids and they're arguing, they'll say something to each other, especially if they're siblings, brothers or sisters, and they'll be arguing, they'll say something harsh. Don't say that. Those are words you can never take back. When you kids look at each other and say, shut up! I know you don't do that. That's harsh words, isn't it? I know you don't do that, though. You never get mad at each other, do you? That's not true. But that's the reason why we have to be so careful. And folks, that's what we need to be known for loving Jesus and loving others. Now, contrary, let me just give you a warning. The guy on Facebook has said, and he's made a big thing for about a month and a half now, but it's all about the love, all about love, all about love. When your theology only focuses on the love of Christ, it won't be long before you have all kind of errors slipping. And that's been his case too. Because God is love, but he's much more than that. He's love, he's wrath, he's justice, he's holiness, he's righteous. I mean, he's purity. I mean, he's all of the above. And I don't know if you saw my post today. I'll make this fit in with the scripture, but I was reading through John today, John 7, and Jesus shows up at the temple at feast time and he's teaching. And I go, we know where he's from. Where did he learn letters? He's an unlearned man. And that's one of those things it just jumped off the page at me. I've read it many times, but that jumped. He's an unlearned man. I wrote a post that said that was their misunderstanding of who they were talking to. Jesus was an unlearned man. That's true, because he had nothing to learn. He's the sum of all knowledge. He's the sum of all truth. He's the sum of all wisdom. He wasn't a student speaking to them. He was the sum of all letters and truth. He knew everything. There was nothing Jesus could learn. Amen?
That's funny when you focus on only love. You ever think about it? If you put that into perspective, like compare that with your relationship with a person, and say, you know what, for my wife, I'm going to focus on forgiveness. You are forgiveness. So just know I'm going to cheat on you. I'm going to lie to you. I'm not going to take care of you. But remember, you're forgiveness. So just let all that go.
Well, that's really the way. That's a good illustration.
I mean, you can't just pick one attribute of your spouse and say you're going to be that, and just forget the fact you expect reliability, you expect faithfulness. No, you are forgiveness. That's all you are. So everything I do from here on out, just suck it
I hadn't
up.
thought about it that way, but that's
forgiveness.
That's a good summation of where these folks are going, especially like this guy, because now he's doing all kind of things that he used to think was wrong. But now because God is love, he's okay with it.
Yeah, you take one attribute, you
Take
take nothing else.
You take one attribute. And that's the reason why, again, we have to be.
Wow. That's making God so two-dimensional.
It is. He's all love, but that just shows he's the same guy who said several weeks ago he's learned he don't have to read his Bible every day. He don't even read it every week now.
You've literally made God into, I mean, not exaggerating, but you've made him into a paper thing you put up on a felt display. I mean, he's literally, there's no depth to him. He's just one thing.
He's just love. That's all he is.
You built him into an image.
And he calls him Papa.
That's a false idol.
And so he says, you've got to. I love what Dr. Vance Havner used to say. He said, what is in the well will come up in the bucket. And that goes along with what Jesus said. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Right? What's in here is going to come out right here. That's the reason when the Pharisees, why aren't your disciples washing their hands before they eat? Don't they know the law? And Jesus said, not the law, that's your tradition. He said, let me tell you right now, what they're putting inside their mouth ain't going to hurt them. It's what's coming out. He said, germs may go in, that's fine. He said, but the deadly part is what's coming out of the mouth. He said, because within are fornications, adulteries, murders, and lies, and everything else. That's what corrupts a man, what's already down in it. And so, when we talk, it's a reflection of who we are. Amen? Well, let me give you one more thing when we wrap it up. Number 5 point. The wisdom of a godly tongue. The wisdom of a godly tongue is found in verses 13 through 18. And I'm just going to kind of summarize it this way. A wise tongue is a gentle tongue. Verses 13 through 14. He says, show out of a good conversation. Watch your words. Unwise tongues are full of fleshly, carnal, devilish outpourings. by the way, when you write like that or you speak like that, that's where you'd rather be anonymous. When people file anonymous charges, I don't buy into that at all. Dwight Moody, after one of his great meetings in Chicago years ago, back in the mid-1800s when he was preaching and shaking two continents for Christ, he made enemies, people, and he received a letter at the beginning of a service one night. And he opened it up, and it was just a letter, fiery attack on Moody. And he said, how about that? He said, I've been attacked a lot because it was no name on the bottom of the letter. No name on the bottom of the letter. And he said, how about that? Here's a man that wrote a letter. No, excuse me. It wasn't blank. He said, a fool. How about that? A man signed himself off as a fool. That's what he is. But this man had tried to be anonymous. Called Moody a fool, but really it's reflecting his own foolishness. But a wise tongue is a gentle tongue. A wise tongue is a humble tongue in verse 15 and 16. He said, don't be deceived. He said, if there's strife, I remember watching, I don't know if y'all, one of my favorite shows over the years has been the Beverly Hillbillies. Jethro, don't shake your head. If you don't like it, there's the door, all right? Jethro was giving Granny driving lessons one day. And they got back, of course, Jethro's just shaking. He said, and Granny come in, and Jed says, how did the driving lessons go? She said, there was crazy Beverly Hills drivers don't know how to drive. There were wrecks all around me. And Jethro was, Granny, you caused all of them. And it's what, if you look around and there's strife always following you. Maybe it's not them, maybe it's our tongue. He said, where strife is and envying is, there's going to be confusion in every evil work. If you've been in a church squabble, you know how that plays out, don't you? Nothing good ever comes from that. And lastly, a wise tongue is a peaceful tongue. Verse 17 and 18. It's easy. Notice what I love the way he said it. Wisdom is from above, is pure, peaceable, gentle, easy to be entreated. In other words, people don't have to. From that verse there, my mom many years ago, she was talking about this man that's a well-respected preacher. Matter of fact, it was Dr. Lee Roberts. Most of us know who he was. She said he defies all of the typical big-name preachers of the day. Because anytime you walk up to him, he's ready to talk to you. And he was. I mean, it didn't matter who you were. Now, he had and even at 92 years old, last time he came, he still hadn't seen me in years, won't call me by name. If he had met you before, he was going to call you by name. He could remember your name. If he met you once, he knew your name. I wish I had a memory like that. If I meet you once, next time I'm going to ask you, what's that name again? Isn't that right, Bob? But she said his wisdom was gentle and easy to be entreated. Dr. Lee Robertson pastored a church that ran thousands. But even with the people he disagreed with, I never heard him say a critical word about anybody. Now, there's one man on the internet today said that's the reason why everything fell apart after he left. No. His kindness didn't cause things to fall apart. Even with people he disagreed with, he was charitable toward them. That's what James says, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. In other words, don't be two-faced. While you're talking to somebody, you say this, and you turn around and you talk to somebody else, you say that. No, be consistent. Amen? Well, there you go. There you have it. 3 rules of speech before we close. Let me write this down. That we learn from this right here. 3 rules of things. Number 1 is it truth. Is it truth? Number 2, is it necessary? And number 3, is it kind and loving? Is it truth? Is it necessary? Is it kind and loving? That will shape how we speak, will it not? That's what we've learned from James 3 this past few weeks. Well, God bless you. Anybody want to add anything to it? Thank you. That was a good observation while ago. I'll have to remember that. All right, let's go to the Lord in prayer and we'll be dismissed. Father, we thank you for being here tonight with us. And I pray that you just bless down as we go home, give us safety, watch over us and bring us back on Sunday. Give us a good attendance on Sunday so we might reach more people. Pray for Pedro that maybe he'll be back with us, Lord. And thank you that Donald was able to have a visit with him today. And I pray that you just bless him on there. In Jesus' name, amen. And y'all help me remember, I forgot the past couple of Sunday nights where we didn't have church Sunday night before last, but we still have those encounter testimonies. We just